The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the McKenna ranch, turning the red dust into shimmering waves of heat that danced across the desert floor. Sarah McKenna wiped the sweat from her brow as she mended the fence post that the latest windstorm had knocked askew. At 24, she had already buried one husband and inherited more troubles than blessings with his small cattle operation. "Damn thing won't hold," she muttered, driving the wooden stake deeper into the unforgiving earth. Her calloused hands, once soft and pampered back in St. Louis, now bore the marks of a year's worth of ranch work. The black mourning dress she'd worn for months had been replaced by practical brown cotton and worn leather boots. Widow's weeds had no place in this harsh land. The distant crack of rifle fire made her freeze. Then came the thunder of hoofbeats, growing closer. Sarah grabbed her husband's old Winchester from against the fence post and crouched low, scanning the horizon. A dust cloud approached from the east, where the cavalry patrol had ridden out that morning. 3 soldiers came racing past her property line, their horses lathered with sweat and foam. Behind them, barely visible through the dust, she caught glimpses of Apache riders in pursuit. The running battle moved across the desert like a deadly dance, the pop of gunfire echoing off the canyon walls. Sarah stayed hidden until the sounds faded into the distance. Only then did she notice the dark stain on the rocks near her water well. Blood, fresh blood, still glistening in the afternoon heat. Following the trail, she found him. The Apache warrior lay crumpled behind a large boulder, his breathing shallow and labored. A bullet had torn through his left shoulder, and another had grazed his thigh. His long black hair was matted with sweat and dust, his bronze skin pale from blood loss. Despite his injuries, his hand still gripped a bone-handled knife. Sarah's first instinct was to run. Every settler in the territory had heard the stories: Apache raids, scalping, torture. But as she looked at the wounded man, she saw something that gave her pause. He was young, perhaps 25, with a strong jawline and high cheekbones that spoke of nobility rather than savagery. Even unconscious, there was something proud and beautiful about his face. "Lord help me," she whispered, setting down her rifle. She couldn't leave him to die. Whatever he was, wherever he came from, he was a human being bleeding to death on her land. Sarah ran to the house and gathered her medical supplies, what little she had. Tom had been shot by cattle rustlers 2 years ago, and she'd learned basic wound care from the territorial doctor. Her hands shook as she filled a basin with water and grabbed clean rags. When she returned, the warrior's dark eyes were open, watching her with a mixture of pain and wariness. He tried to sit up, but fell back with a groan. "Don't move," Sarah said softly, kneeling beside him. "You're hurt bad." He spoke in Apache, his voice barely above a whisper. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. He was telling her to stay away. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, slowly reaching for the water basin. "I want to help." The warrior's eyes followed her every movement as she dampened a cloth and gently began cleaning the blood from his shoulder wound. He tensed at her touch, but didn't pull away. The bullet had passed clean through, which was fortunate. She wouldn't have to dig it out. As she worked, Sarah found herself studying his face. There was intelligence in those dark eyes, and something else, a deep sadness that seemed to go beyond his physical pain. His skin was smooth except for a thin scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, probably from an old battle. "What's your name?" she asked quietly, as she bandaged his shoulder. He watched her lips as she spoke, then said something in his own language. It sounded like Ayana. "Ayana!" she repeated, and he nodded slightly. "I'm Sarah." The setting sun painted the desert in shades of orange and purple as she finished tending to his wounds. Ayana had lost consciousness again, his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep sleep. Sarah sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of what she had done. She had given aid and comfort to an Apache warrior on her own land. If the cavalry patrol came back and found him here, they would arrest her as a traitor. If her neighbors discovered what she'd done, they would run her out of the territory, or worse. But as she looked at Ayana's peaceful face in the fading light, Sarah felt something stir in her chest that she hadn't experienced since Tom's death. It wasn't just compassion for a wounded man. It was something deeper, more dangerous, something that could get them both killed. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't move him tonight. He was too weak, and the risk of reopening his wounds was too great. She would hide him in the old root cellar behind the house until he was strong enough to travel. She just prayed that no one would come looking for him before then. The root cellar was cool and dark, carved into the hillside behind Sarah's house, where her late husband had stored vegetables through the scorching summers. Now it served as a refuge for the most dangerous secret of her life. For 3 days, Sarah had been living a double existence. During daylight hours, she maintained the facade of the struggling widow, tending to her small herd of cattle and keeping up the ranch. But every few hours, she would slip away to the cellar with water, food, and fresh bandages. Ayana was healing faster than she'd expected. His shoulder wound had stopped bleeding, and the fever that had ravaged him the first night had broken. But what surprised Sarah most was his gentleness. Despite being a warrior, despite the knife that never left his side, he accepted her care with quiet dignity. "You should eat more," Sarah said on the 4th morning, setting down a plate of eggs and biscuits. She had been learning to communicate through gestures and the few English words he seemed to understand. Ayana sat propped against the earthen wall, his bronze torso bare, except for the clean bandages she'd wrapped around his shoulder and ribs. The sight of his muscular chest and the way shadows played across his skin made Sarah's breath catch in her throat, a reaction that both thrilled and terrified her. "Sarah," he said her name carefully, as if tasting each syllable. His voice was deeper now that the pain wasn't overwhelming him, rich and warm like whiskey. "Why you help me?" The question hung in the cool air between them. It was the first time he'd spoken more than single words in English, and the directness of it made her heart race. "Because you needed help," she said simply, but they both knew it was more complicated than that. Ayana reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her hand where it rested on the wooden crate beside him. His fingers were warm and calloused from years of riding and fighting, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Your husband," he said, struggling with the English words. "Where is he?" Sarah's throat tightened. "Dead. 2 years now." Something shifted in Ayana's dark eyes, understanding, perhaps even sympathy. "I am sorry," he said, and she believed he meant it. "Were you with the raiders who attacked the Patterson place last month?" The question escaped before Sarah could stop it. She needed to know, needed to understand who this man really was. Ayana's hand fell away from hers. "No, I was hunting. Alone." He met her eyes steadily. "I do not kill women and children." The conviction in his voice convinced her more than any protest could have. This was not a man who made war on innocent people. "Then why were the soldiers chasing you?" "Because I am Apache," he said with quiet bitterness. "That is enough reason for them." Sarah had no answer for that. She'd seen how the cavalry treated any Apache they encountered, guilty or innocent. The territorial government's policy was clear. All Apache were to be relocated to reservations or eliminated as threats. "I should go check the ranch," she said, standing abruptly. The intimacy of the moment was becoming too much, too dangerous. "Sarah." Her name on his lips stopped her at the entrance. "Be careful. More soldiers come today." "How do you know?" Ayana tapped his ear. "I listen. They look for me." Fear shot through her chest. "Will they search the ranch?" "Maybe." "You must act normal. If they find me—" He didn't finish the sentence, but they both knew what would happen. Sarah spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, checking and rechecking her story. If questioned, she would say she'd seen Apache riders in the distance, but they had moved on toward the mountains. She practiced the lie until it sounded natural. The cavalry patrol arrived just after noon, 6 soldiers led by Lieutenant Morrison, a young officer with ambitious eyes and a reputation for cruelty toward Apache prisoners. "Afternoon, Mrs. McKenna," Morrison said, tipping his hat from horseback. "We're tracking a wounded Apache who escaped from yesterday's skirmish. You seen any sign of Indians around here?" Sarah shaded her eyes against the sun, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I heard gunfire yesterday, but I stayed inside. This morning I found some blood near my well, but no sign of anyone." Morrison dismounted and walked to the well, kneeling to examine the stained rocks. "This blood is fresh. Trail leads toward your property. Like I said, I didn't see anyone. If there was an Apache here, he's long gone." The lieutenant's pale blue eyes studied her face intently. "You mind if we take a look around? Apache are clever about hiding." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she nodded. "Of course. Though I'd appreciate it if you didn't upset my cattle." For 20 minutes the soldiers searched the ranch buildings, the barn, even the small chicken coop. Sarah forced herself to follow them, making conversation about the weather and her struggles with the ranch. All the while her thoughts were with Ayana hidden in the root cellar, just 50 yards from where they stood. "What's in there?" Morrison asked, pointing toward the cellar entrance. "Root cellar. Nothing but vegetables and preserves. Mind if I take a look?" Sarah's mouth went dry. Of course not. She led Morrison to the heavy wooden door set into the hillside, her legs feeling like water. As she reached for the handle, she sent up a desperate prayer that Ayanna had hidden himself well. The door opened with a creak of old hinges. Morrison stepped inside, his boots loud on the wooden planks that covered the earthen floor. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of preserved peaches, green beans and pickled vegetables. Sacks of potatoes sat in neat rows. Sarah held her breath as Morrison moved deeper into the cellar, his eyes scanning every corner. Behind the largest stack of potato sacks, she knew Ayanna was pressed against the back wall, silent as death. "Smells like vegetables and earth," Morrison said finally, emerging into the sunlight. "Nothing here." Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully that her knees almost buckled. "Like I told you, Lieutenant." As the patrol prepared to leave, Morrison mounted his horse and looked down at her one final time. "You be careful out here alone, Mrs. McKenna. Apache are dangerous, especially wounded ones. They might seem peaceful, but they'll turn on you quick as a rattlesnake." "I'll keep that in mind," Sarah said. After the soldiers disappeared over the ridge, Sarah waited a full hour before returning to the cellar. She found Ayanna exactly where she'd expected, crammed into the narrow space behind the potato sacks, barely breathing. "They're gone," she whispered. Ayanna emerged from his hiding place, wincing as his wounded shoulder protested the movement. In the dim light filtering through the doorway, Sarah could see the strain and pain etched across his features. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "We saved each other," she replied, and realized it was true. In protecting him, she had also protected something precious and fragile that was growing between them, something that had no name, but felt more real than anything she'd experienced since Tom's death. As Ayanna settled back against the wall to rest, Sarah found herself wondering how much longer she could keep this dangerous secret. But looking at his face, seeing the gratitude and something deeper in his dark eyes, she knew she would risk everything to keep him safe, even if it destroyed them both. A week had passed since the cavalry's search, and Ayanna's strength was returning with each passing day. Sarah found herself spending longer periods in the cellar, drawn by conversations that grew deeper and more intimate despite the language barrier between them. "Tell me about your family," Sarah said on a sweltering afternoon, bringing him fresh water and clean bandages. The summer heat had made the cellar their refuge from more than just prying eyes. Ayanna was sitting up now, his back against the cool earth wall, shirtless in the stifling heat. Sarah tried not to stare at the way perspiration gleamed on his bronze skin, or how his dark hair fell across his shoulders like black silk. "My mother died when I was boy," he said, his English improving daily through their conversations. "Father killed by soldiers when I was 15 winters." "I'm sorry." Sarah settled beside him, closer than propriety would allow if anyone could see them. "Do you have brothers? Sisters?" "One brother, Nalnish. He leads our band now." Ayanna's expression grew troubled. "He thinks I am dead. The soldiers, they shot my horse. I fell into canyon." Sarah's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. "He must be worried sick." "Yes, but if I return now," Ayanna gestured to his healing wounds, "I tell them about you. Some will not understand." The weight of his words settled between them. They both knew what he meant. Just as her people would condemn her for helping an Apache, his people might view her as an enemy regardless of her kindness. "What will you do when you're healed?" The question had been haunting Sarah for days. Soon Ayanna would be strong enough to leave, and she would be alone again with nothing but the memory of these stolen moments. Instead of answering, Ayanna reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You are beautiful, Sarah McKenna." The words, spoken in his deep accented English, sent fire through her veins. She should pull away, should remind them both of the impossibility of their situation. Instead, she leaned into his touch. "This is madness," she whispered, but she didn't move away. "Yes," he agreed, his dark eyes intense, "but sometimes madness is the only truth." Before she could think, before fear could stop her, Sarah kissed him. His lips were warm and soft, tasting of the mint tea she'd brought him. For a moment he was perfectly still, as if afraid to believe what was happening. Then his good arm came around her waist, pulling her closer as he deepened the kiss with a hunger that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Sarah," Ayanna said her name like a prayer, his forehead resting against hers. "I should not. We cannot." "I know," she whispered, her hands pressed against his chest where she could feel his heart racing. I know all the reasons why this is wrong. Your people will kill you if they know, and yours will kill me if they find out. Yes." They stared at each other in the dim light, both understanding the enormous risk they were taking, but neither pulled away. "I don't care," Sarah said finally, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "For the first time since Tom died, I feel alive again. I don't care what anyone else thinks." Ayana's hand cupped her face again, his thumb brushing across her lips. "You make me forget the hatred. When I look at you, I do not see the enemy. I see only Sarah. And when I look at you, I don't see an Apache warrior. I see a man who makes me feel things I thought I'd never feel again." The confession hung between them, honest and terrifying. They had crossed a line from which there would be no return. This time, when Ayana kissed her, it was with a passion that spoke of desperate need and dangerous love. Sarah melted into his embrace, her fingers tangling in his long hair as she gave herself over to the impossible, wonderful madness of loving him. When they finally parted, she curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. For a few precious moments, they existed in a world where nothing mattered but the warmth of each other's touch. "What happens now?" Sarah asked quietly. "I do not know," Ayana admitted. "In my world, love is not enough to bridge such differences. Maybe we make our own world." Ayana's arm tightened around her. "That is a beautiful dream. Dreams are all I have left." They lay in comfortable silence as the afternoon heat pressed down on the desert above them. Sarah knew they were living on borrowed time, that soon reality would intrude on their hidden sanctuary. But for now, in the cool darkness of the cellar, she allowed herself to believe that love might be enough. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered their peace. Sarah bolted upright, her blood turning to ice. "Someone's coming!" Ayana was instantly alert, reaching for his knife as Sarah peered through the crack in the cellar door. A single rider was approaching the ranch house, not cavalry this time, but her neighbor Jake Morrison, the lieutenant's older brother and one of the most vocal Apache haters in the territory. "Stay hidden," Sarah whispered urgently. "No matter what happens, don't come out." She straightened her dress and hair as best she could, then slipped out of the cellar and walked toward the house as if she'd been doing chores inside. "Afternoon, Jake," she called, forcing a smile. Jake Morrison was a big man with a permanent scowl and hands stained with tobacco juice. He'd been after Sarah to sell him her land ever since Tom's death, and she suspected he'd use any excuse to force her off her property. "Sarah," he said, not dismounting. "Heard my brother's patrol was by here looking for Apache sign." "That's right, they didn't find anything." Jake's small eyes studied her intently. "Funny thing, though. Miguel Vasquez was driving his sheep through the canyon yesterday, and he saw smoke coming from your direction. Said it looked like someone was burning green wood, the kind that makes smoke to signal with." Sarah's mouth went dry, but she kept her expression neutral. "I burned some damp brush I cleared from the fence line." "Probably what he saw." "Probably." Jake leaned forward in his saddle. "Thing is, Sarah, there's been talk in town. People wondering how a woman alone manages to keep Apache from bothering her cattle when they've hit every other ranch in the valley." The accusation was clear, and it sent cold fear shooting through Sarah's chest. "I've been lucky, I guess." "Luck runs out," Jake said ominously. "And when it does, people who've been helping Apache tend to disappear. Permanently." With that threat hanging in the air, Jake spurred his horse and rode away, leaving Sarah shaking with the knowledge that their secret was no longer safe. When she returned to the cellar, Ayana took one look at her face and knew everything had changed. "We are discovered," he said quietly. "Not yet, but soon." Sarah's voice was steady despite the terror coursing through her. "You have to leave. Tonight. And you." Sarah looked into his dark eyes, seeing her own fear reflected there. But underneath the fear was something stronger, a love that had bloomed in darkness and danger, forbidden but undeniably real. "I don't know," she whispered, "but whatever happens, I'm glad I found you." Ayana pulled her close, holding her as if he could protect her from the storm that was coming. But they both knew that some storms could not be weathered, only survived. The moon was dark that night, casting the desert in shadows perfect for secrets and farewells. Sarah had spent the evening gathering supplies for Ayana's journey: dried meat, water, ammunition for the pistol she'd insisted he take from Tom's collection. Each item felt like another nail in the coffin of her heart. "You cannot come back here," she said as they stood together in the cellar one last time. "Jake Morrison is watching. If he sees any sign of Apache presence, he'll bring a lynch mob." Ayana nodded grimly, already dressed in the dark clothing she'd provided to help him blend with the night. His shoulder was still tender, but the wound had healed enough for hard travel. I know. Where will you go? North, to the mountains. Find my brother's band. He reached out and touched her face with infinite gentleness. But first I must ask you something. Sarah's heart clenched at the seriousness in his voice. What? Come with me. The words hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Sarah felt her world tilt on its axis. Ayanna, I know what I ask, he said urgently. I know you would leave everything, your home, your people, your life, but I cannot leave you here to face their anger alone, and his voice cracked slightly. I cannot live without you, Sarah. These days with you have shown me what my heart can hold. I will not give that up. Tears stung Sarah's eyes. The offer was everything she wanted and everything she feared. Your people won't accept me. I'd be an outsider forever. Some will be angry, yes, but my brother Nalnish is wise. He will see your heart as I do. Ayanna took her hands in his. And there are others like us, Apache women who have married white men and found acceptance. Love finds a way if we are brave enough to follow it. And if they don't accept me, if they kill me, then we will make our own path. There are places in the mountains where two people can live free, answerable to no tribe or town. His dark eyes burned with desperate hope. Say yes, Sarah. Choose love over fear. Before Sarah could answer, the sound of multiple horses approaching shattered the night silence. Through the cellar's crack, they could see torches bobbing in the darkness. At least a dozen riders surrounding the ranch house. Sarah McKenna, Jake Morrison's voice boomed across the yard. Come out where we can see you. Terror shot through Sarah like lightning. It's too late, she whispered. Not yet, Ayanna said fiercely. He grabbed his knife and the pistol she'd given him. I can fight my way out, create confusion for you to escape. No, Sarah gripped his arm. There are too many. They'll kill you. Then I die fighting rather than let them hang me. The torches were moving closer now, and Sarah could hear men's voices discussing which buildings to search first. In minutes they would find the cellar. There's another way, Sarah said suddenly, her mind racing. The old mining tunnel Tom showed me. It connects to this cellar and comes out a quarter-mile north near the creek. You can escape that way. And leave you to face them alone? Never. Listen to me, Sarah said urgently, gripping his face in her hands. If they find us together, we both die. But if you escape, if you live, then maybe someday. Sarah McKenna! Jake Morrison's voice was closer now, right outside the cellar. We know you're harboring an Apache. Come out now, and we might let you live. Ayanna's jaw clenched with rage and desperation. I will not abandon you. You're not abandoning me. You're giving us a chance. Sarah kissed him hard, pouring all her love and fear into that one desperate moment. Go to the canyon where Willow Creek bends east. Wait for me there tomorrow night. If I don't come, you will come, Ayanna said fiercely. Promise me you will come. I promise. The lie came easily, because she loved him too much to take away his hope. They both knew the odds were against her surviving the next few hours, let alone escaping to meet him. I love you, she whispered against his lips. Kedana, he said in Apache, then translated, I love you too, more than my own life. The sound of boots approaching the cellar door forced them apart. Ayanna squeezed through the narrow opening to the mining tunnel, just as the cellar door burst open. Well, well, Jake Morrison said, his torch illuminating Sarah's pale face. What do we have here? Behind him crowded 6 other men from town, all armed, all looking eager for violence. Sarah recognized the banker, the blacksmith, 2 ranchers who'd lost cattle to Apache raids. Nothing, Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain steady. I was checking my preserves. In the dark, Morrison laughed coldly. Boys search every inch of this place. They tore through the cellar like animals, overturning crates, smashing jars, looking for any sign of Apache presence. Sarah's heart hammered as one man came within inches of the tunnel opening, now concealed behind a stack of potato sacks that Ayanna had hastily repositioned. Found something, the blacksmith called out, holding up a strip of blood-stained cloth, one of the bandages she'd used on Ayanna's wounds. Morrison's eyes glittered with triumph. Fresh blood, Apache blood, I'd wager. He grabbed Sarah's arm roughly. Where is he? I don't know what you're talking about. Morrison backhanded her across the face, the blow sending her stumbling into the earthen wall. Don't lie to me, woman. We know you've been hiding an Apache. Miguel saw the smoke signals. My brother found blood, and now this. He waved the bandage. Where is he? Sarah tasted blood where her lip had split, but she met Morrison's gaze defiantly. Go to hell. This time the blow knocked her to her knees. Stars exploded across her vision as pain lanced through her skull. "String her up, boys," Morrison said casually. "Apache lovers don't deserve a trial." "Wait," one of the ranchers said uneasily. "She's a white woman, Jake. Maybe we should take her to the territorial judge." "She's a traitor," Morrison snarled. "And traitors hang." They dragged Sarah from the cellar into the yard, where someone had already thrown a rope over the old oak tree near the house, the same tree where she and Tom had hung a swing during their brief, happy marriage. As they forced the noose around her neck, Sarah closed her eyes and thought of Ayanna. She prayed he had made it safely through the tunnel, that he was riding hard toward the mountains and freedom. At least one of them would survive this impossible love. "Any last words?" Morrison asked mockingly. Sarah lifted her chin and looked him in the eye. "Yes, I regret nothing." Morrison's hand moved to the rope that would end her life, but before he could pull it, the thunder of hoofbeats erupted from the darkness, and Apache war cries split the night air. A dozen riders burst into the torchlight, Ayanna leading them with his brother Nalnish at his side. The lynch mob scattered like startled cattle as arrows and bullets flew. Morrison dove for cover behind the water trough, abandoning Sarah to save his own skin. Ayanna leaped from his horse and cut the rope from Sarah's neck with one swift stroke of his knife. "I told you I would not abandon you," he said fiercely. "How did you—" Sarah gasped, her throat raw from the rope. "I found my brother's hunting party and told them what kind of men your people really are." Ayanna helped her onto his horse as gunfire continued to erupt around them. "Now we ride, and we do not look back." As they galloped into the desert night, Sarah wrapped her arms around Ayanna's waist and pressed her face against his back. Behind them, her old life burned in the light of scattered torches. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and exile from everything she had ever known. But she was alive, and she was with the man she loved. For now, that was enough. 3 months later, the autumn winds carried the scent of pine and wood smoke through the hidden canyon where Ayanna's band had made their temporary camp. Sarah sat beside the small fire outside the wickiup she now shared with Ayanna, her hands working to tan a deer hide using the techniques Ayanna's sister-in-law had taught her. The early days had been the hardest. Some of the Apache warriors had wanted to kill her outright, viewing her as a spy or a burden that would slow them down. Others had been merely suspicious, watching her every move with hostile eyes. But Nalnish, Ayanna's brother, had been true to his word. The band's leader was a man of wisdom who judged people by their actions rather than their blood. "She saved my brother's life," Nalnish had declared on that first tense morning when they'd reached the band's camp. "She risked everything to protect him when she could have turned him over to the soldiers. That makes her family." It hadn't been instant acceptance, but it was a beginning, and Sarah had worked hard to prove herself worthy of their protection. She learned to cook over an open fire, to preserve meat for the long winter ahead, to move silently through the forest when the band had to relocate to avoid cavalry patrols. Her hands, once soft with widow's idleness, became calloused from constant work. But it was worth every hardship to wake up each morning in Ayanna's arms. "You are troubled," Ayanna said, settling beside her as the sun set behind the canyon walls. Even after months together, his presence still made her heart race. Not troubled, thinking. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, finding comfort in his warmth and strength. "Your brother received word from the trading post today." "About your ranch?" Sarah nodded. After her escape, Jake Morrison had claimed her abandoned property for unpaid debts, a transparent theft that the territorial court had eagerly approved. Everything she had built with Tom was gone, seized by the same men who had tried to murder her. "I should feel angry," she said quietly. "That land was all I had left of my old life. But you do not feel angry." "No, I feel free." Sarah looked up at Ayanna's face, noting the way the firelight played across his strong features. "Is that wrong? Should I mourn what I've lost?" Ayanna considered this carefully, as he always did her questions. "When I was a boy, my grandmother told me a story about a bird that lived in a beautiful cage. The cage was made of gold, and the bird was fed the finest seeds, given the clearest water. But the bird dreamed of the sky. What happened to the bird? One day a storm broke open the cage. The bird could have rebuilt it, made it stronger. Instead, she flew into the thunder and rain. Some said she was foolish to leave safety for uncertainty." Ayanna's arm tightened around Sarah. "But my grandmother said the bird finally understood the difference between existing and living." Sarah smiled, feeling the last of her regrets slip away like autumn leaves on the wind. "I love your grandmother's stories. She would have loved you," Ayanna said softly. She always said the strongest hearts are those that choose love over fear. From across the camp came the sound of laughter as some of the children played a game with painted stones. Sarah had been teaching them English words, while they taught her Apache phrases that made Ayanna blush when she repeated them innocently to the elders. "Ayanna," Sarah said, taking his hand in hers, "I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him turn to face her fully. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy and nervousness. "I'm going to have a baby." For a moment, Ayanna was perfectly still. Then his face transformed with such pure happiness that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "You are certain?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 months certain. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Ayanna cupped her face in his hands, his dark eyes bright with unshed tears. "A child, our child. Are you happy?" Instead of answering with words, Ayanna kissed her with a passion that spoke of joy, wonder, and fierce protectiveness. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing and crying at the same time. "I have never been happier," he said, pressing his forehead against hers. "But I am also terrified." "Why?" "Because now I have everything to lose. You and our child. You are my whole world, Sarah. If anything happened to you—" "Nothing will happen to us," Sarah said firmly. "We're strong together. We've survived everything they've thrown at us so far. The soldiers will never stop hunting us, and when they discover our child—" Sarah understood his fear. A child born of Apache and white blood would be welcome in neither world, forever caught between two peoples who viewed such unions as abomination. But as she felt the first stirrings of life within her, she knew their love was creating something beautiful, not shameful. "Then we'll raise our child to be proud of both bloodlines," she said, "to understand that love doesn't recognize the boundaries others try to draw." Ayanna placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "He will be strong, like his mother. She will be wise, like her father." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Around them, the camp settled into evening routines, mothers calling children to bed, warriors checking weapons, elders sharing stories around the central fire. "Do you ever miss it?" Ayanna asked quietly. "Your old life?" Sarah considered the question honestly. She missed some things. The comfort of a real bed, the luxury of hot baths, the simple pleasure of reading books by lamplight. But those were material comforts, not the substance of happiness. "I miss parts of it," she admitted. "But I don't miss being alone. I don't miss being afraid of loving someone again. And I don't miss the hatred that consumed so many people in that world." "This life is hard," Ayanna warned. "Harder than what you knew before. We may always be running, always looking over our shoulders." "I know." Sarah turned to face him fully. "But I'd rather face uncertainty with you than safety without you. You asked me once to choose love over fear. I'm still choosing it every day." Ayanna pulled her close, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you, Sarah McKenna. I will love you until the mountains crumble and the rivers run dry." "Kedana," Sarah replied in Apache, the words coming naturally now. "I love you too." As winter approached and the band prepared to move deeper into the mountains, Sarah felt a peace she had never known in her old life. She was carrying the child of the man she loved, surrounded by people who had become her family, living free under the vast desert sky. The world beyond their canyon might never accept their love, but here in this hidden place, it flourished like wildflowers after rain. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. As she fell asleep that night in Ayanna's arms, Sarah dreamed not of the past she had lost, but of the future they were building together. One choice, one day, one act of love at a time. In the morning, they would break camp and ride deeper into Apache territory, where their child would be born free and loved, regardless of what blood flowed in its veins. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of the American Southwest, two hearts that had found each other against all odds would continue beating as one.